This is a capstone event for a departmental theme program that we call Convergences that I've had the pleasure of coordinating. And we focused this year on the Technological Sublime. We've had various speakers come in, coordinated classes, we've had terrific student presentations as a result of this program, which is meant to encourage conversation within the English department, which is a very vibrant place, but also, as this attests to, sort of reach out into the community and other parts of the campus. So I want to thank everyone who's made Convergences a success. I really appreciate it. Next year's theme will be on the body. I also want to note that tonight's talk is part of a two-day graduate student organized conference called New Directions. Continues tomorrow with numerous student presentations and an important talk from Sid Dobrin, who's a visiting scholar from the University of Florida. He'll be talking at 12:30 in Harville 305 on emerging technologies, post-human bodies, and complex ecologies, thinking at the edge of chaos. So I'd encourage you to come to that. For tonight's event, I want to thank the Department of English, especially Larry Evers, Meglota Brown, Kate Bernheimer, John Melillo, Sarah Miner, Jose Cortez, and the entire New Directions crew, Allison Deming and Allison Duchesne for their support and encouragement. I also want to acknowledge the College of Humanities support and their stellar events team of Jenna Finfrock, Amanda Hunt, and Melissa Miller. I also want to thank the Institute of the Environment for its support. So who are you when you come to science fiction? Are you a fan since childhood, eagerly reading H.G. Wells and Robert Heinlein, William Gibson and Joan Vinge? Are you a scientist, maybe a planetary geologist studying the ancient waters of Mars, or a geneticist at the cutting edge of synthetic biology? Are you a reader with the English department stamp of approval, right, which certifies that you're interested in the arcane architectures of scansion, Bakhtinian dialogics, and deconstruction? Do you read George Eliot for work and then slum with Raymond Chandler and Arthur C. Clarke on the weekends? Are you part of the growing legion of young readers and writers for whom the distinctions between the so-called literary mainstream and genre fiction are dissolving? I ask this because I think we need to be flexible readers. To put it crisply, readers trained with the English department stamp of approval, which is a good one, I have one, and I give them, or sometimes not. Readers trained in that literary way of reading might value characterization and prose style in a way that a reader steeped in science fiction may not. That reader may emphasize premise, a sense of wonder of the sublime. These are all good values to have. And when I read and teach science fiction, I'm interested in reaching this Venn diagram of what I call a unitary reading experience that unites literary reading values with generic reading values. And it's a place that's occupied by a number of terrific writers, which brings me to Stan Robinson. He's one of those contemporaries who's produced work of deep and lasting importance, moving work that is and will remain crucial and well crafted. It's exquisite. And you'll see that in 2312 if you haven't read it. Stan is one of the most acclaimed writers of science fiction, I think, in the history of the genre. He's the author of the landmark Mars trilogy, the Science in the Capital series about climate change, The Years of Rice and Salt, Galileo's Dream, 2312, and many other titles. He's the winner of several awards, including the Hugo and Nebula, and 2312 has just been shortlisted for the Arthur C. Clarke Award. We learned that yesterday. And he's been praised as one of the masters of literary science fiction. The Times literary supplement called Galileo's Dream one of the landmarks of American literature, and the LA Times calls his new book vibrant, often moving, an extrapolation hardwired to a truly affecting personal love story, perhaps Robinson's finest novel. His work has been translated into 23 different languages. He's an avid backpacker and environmentalist. He works with the Sequoia Parks Foundation, the Sierra Nevada Research Institute, and Sierra Press. He's been a recipient of the National Science Foundation Antarctic Visiting Artist and Writers Fellowship, and he completed a doctorate under Frederick Jameson on the novels of Philip K. Dick. He's the father of 2 boys. He was a stay-at-home mom-dad. He's married to Lisa Noel, a chemist at the U.S. Geological Survey. Robinson writes of many things, including the land ethic, utopias, the sublime, the future of bodies. And he's interested in beauty and power, the power of nature and the power of human intellect. As Robinson shows in 2312, this beauty is, as David Morris has written, one of wildness, grandeur, and overwhelming power, which with a flash of intensity, can ravish the soul with a sudden transport of thought or feeling. The protagonists of 2312, Swan, an artist and ecologist, and Warum, a diplomat, experience such moments more than once, and in no small way, such moments are part of the love that grows between them, we see in the novel. 2312 is a work of the sublime, and it is a mindful reflection on love and daily meaning. The nature writer Scott Russell Sanders, when he was doing science fiction criticism and he wrote a science fiction novel, once asked in an article where the memorable characters were in science fiction. They're actually everywhere throughout the history of the genre, and they're right here in 2312. So it's my pleasure to welcome the poet laureate of our solar system, Kim Stanley Robinson.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Chris, for that kind introduction. And thank you, Chris and Allison and everybody involved with having me here. It's really a pleasure to be here. And thank you for coming tonight. Let's start at the beginning, with the beginning of 2312. The sun is always just about to rise. Mercury rotates so slowly that you can walk fast enough over its rocky surface to stay ahead of the dawn, and so many people do. Many have made this a way of life. They walk roughly westward, staying always ahead of the stupendous day. Some of them hurry from location to location, pausing to look in cracks they earlier inoculated with bio-leaching metallophytes, quickly scraping free any accumulated residues of gold or tungsten or uranium. But most of them are out there to catch glimpses of the sun. Mercury's ancient face is so battered and irregular that the planet's terminator, the zone of the breaking dawn, is a broad chiaroscuro of black and white, charcoal hollows pricked here and there by brilliant white high points, which grow and grow until all the land is as bright as molten glass and the long day begun. This mixed zone of sun and shadow is often as much as 30 kilometers wide, even though on a level plane the horizon is only a few kilometers off. But so little of Mercury is level. All the old bangs are still there, and some long cliffs from when the planet first cooled and shrank. In a landscape so rumpled, the light can suddenly jump the eastern horizon and leap west to strike some distant prominence. Everyone walking the land has to attend to this possibility, know when and where the longest sun reaches occur, and where they can run for shade if they happen to be caught out. Or if they stay on purpose, because many of them pause in their walkabouts on certain cliffs and crater rims at places marked by stupas, cairns, petroglyphs, mirrors, walls, goldsworthies. The Sunwalkers stand by these facing east, waiting. The horizon they watch is black space over black rock. The super-thin neon argon atmosphere, created by sunlight smashing rock, holds only the faintest pre-dawn glow. But the Sunwalkers know the time, and so they wait and watch until a flick of orange fire dolphins over the horizon, and their blood leaps inside them. More brief banners follow, flicking up, arcing in loops, breaking off and floating free in the sky. Star, oh star, about to break on them. Already their faceplates have darkened and polarized to protect their eyes. The orange banners diverge left and right from the point of first appearance, as if a fire set just over the horizon is spreading north and south. Then a pairing of the photosphere, the actual surface of the sun, blinks and stays, spills slowly to the sides. Depending on the filters deployed in one's faceplate, the star's actual surface can appear as anything from a blue maelstrom to an orange pulsing mass to a simple white circle. The spill to left and right keeps spreading farther than seems possible until it is very obvious one stands on a pebble next to a star. Time to turn and run. But by the time some of the Sunwalkers manage to jerk themselves free, they are stunned, trip and fall, get up and dash west in a panic like no other. Before that, one last look at sunrise on Mercury. In the ultraviolet, it's a perpetual blue snarl of hot and hotter. Magnify your view of it, and the burning tops of the convection cells are revealed in their squiggling thousands, each a thunderhead of fire burning furiously, altogether torching 5 million tons of hydrogen a second, at which rate the star will burn another 4 billion years. All these long spicules of flame dance in circular patterns around the little black circles that are the sunspots, shifting whirlpools in the storms of burning. Masses of spicules flow together like kelp beds threshed by a tide. There are non-biological explanations for all this convoluted motion, all mere physics, nothing more, but in fact, it looks alive, more alive than many a living thing. Looking at it in the apocalypse of the mercurial dawn, it's impossible to believe it's not alive. It roars in your ears. It speaks to you. Most of the Sunwalkers over time try all the various viewing filters and then make choices to suit themselves. Particular filters or sequences of filters become forms of worship, rituals, either personal or shared. It's very easy to get lost in these rituals. As the Sunwalkers stand on their points and watch, it's not uncommon for devotees to become entranced by something in the sight, some pattern never seen before, something in the pulse and flow that snags the mind. Suddenly the sizzle of the fiery cilia becomes audible, a turbulent roaring. That's your own blood rushing through your ears, but in those moments it sounds just like the sun burning. And so people stay too long. Some have their retinas burned, some are blinded, others are killed outright, betrayed by an overwhelmed spacesuit. Some are cooked in groups of a dozen or more. Do you imagine that they must have been fools? Do you think you would never make such a mistake? Don't you be so sure. Really, you have no idea. It's nothing you've ever seen. You may think you are inured, that nothing outside the mind can really interest you anymore, as sophisticated and knowledgeable as you are, but you would be wrong. You are a creature of the sun. The beauty and terror of it, seen from so close, can empty any mind, thrust anyone into a trance, strike thought clean out of your head. People seek it out precisely for that. So now that's the technological sublime, because without the technology, you're not going to be on the surface of Mercury looking at the sunrise. And sublimity is a peculiar emotion, a mixed emotion. I think one of the best descriptions of it is that it is a combination of beauty and terror. So that if you're on the edge of a cliff and you're looking down, Yosemite Falls, and it's 1,500 feet down to below, it's beautiful, but also your hands are locked on the railing, at least mine are. Another way of saying it, Edmund Burke, the sublime is that moment when your senses tell you that you're in danger, big danger, but your reason, your rationality, reminds you that you're not. So that sublime moment is pretty clear in nature. It didn't always, it was an unusual state. It happened when lightning came down 100 yards from you. It happened when a lion chased you back to the campfire, and it was beautiful, but you were terrified. So the sublime was unusual. But the technological sublime, well, you're in this tube, suddenly there's a roaring, it takes off into the sky, you're looking out a window, you're 30,000 feet above the earth, you're looking down. Your senses are telling you you're in terrible danger, because we're still the same primates that evolved on the savannah. On the other hand, your rational mind is saying, well, I would be more in danger if I were on the freeway. This is actually not so bad up here, and so, enjoy the view, because you know the statistics. So the technological sublime is a state that we have become quite used to because we're more in it than not. You're in a box, it begins to move, it's like a cave is moving, well, it's your elevator, you're going to be okay. It's the technological sublime, but we're used to it, so we no longer feel either the beauty or the terror. And I'm making an argument in this book and through most of my work and my life that the real sublime is more sublime than the technological sublime, and that you need to get out of the technological sublime to even know what I'm talking about. So the outdoors, and I love it that we are outdoors tonight doing this reading because of this marvelous room. The outdoors is important. So I'm going to, now I'm going to read you various selections from 2312 and from the book that I have finished since then called Shaman, because, and I'll try to keep each selection relatively brief, but I want you to think about the selections that I choose as being part of this argument that we're making, since Chris's series, I mean, hardly anybody uses the phrase the technological sublime except for me. Usually you see it in French postmodern criticism, and as usual with French postmodern criticism, you don't know what they mean, and you suspect that they don't know either. So it's nice to unpack it a little. So 2312 is constructed in different kinds of strands, taking the method out of John Dos Passos's superb novel, USA. And believe me, I would refer you to USA as a wonderful experience in American history and literature if you're interested. But there are different kinds of passages in USA, and I imitated that. So one of the kinds of passages I want to read to you here is called extracts. And this is a solution to the science fictional formal problem of how do you do exposition without the expository lump, without the info dump, without the things that I have become famous or notorious for doing heedlessly. And I thought this time I would try to alter my usual routine by cutting the exposition down to its necessary units and then having it be like the internet, where when you see a link that you're more interested in than what you're reading in, because you already know what you're reading, you can predict what it's going to say next. You hit a link and you're off to some other passage. So you have to imagine that that's what's happening here, and I'm going to help you out with a little special effects. Statistically very significant results in actuarial tables suggest longevity beyond historical norms is impossible without frequent return, not just to a 1G environment, but to Earth itself. Why this should be so is a matter of dispute, but the fact itself is very clear in the data. We propose to show 1 year in every 6 spent on Earth with no time away longer than 10 years greatly increases longevity. Neglect of this practice leads to a high risk of dying many decades before. Over-sterile environments cannot. The famous or notorious sabbatical has been proposed as an example of hormesis, or mithridatism, in which brief exposure to toxins strengthens the organism against greater. Earth's continuing clutch on space-dwelling humans is physiological and will not go away unless it is fully characterized and all components of it are inoculations of ringworm, bacteria, viruses, etc., impossible to catalog, and yet possible psychological effects also, which means extreme difficulty in defining causation or treatment, not dissimilar to other 500-year projects in intrinsic difficulty. Increase in longevity is a statistical fact, but no guarantee for any particular individual. Life choices shift the probabilities of. The biggest jump in the longevity graphs came at the start of the accelerando, and many feel this was not a coincidence. There is a surge of energy that comes when you realize you may live much longer than you had thought possible. Problems that later complicate the picture don't become evident until. The statistics are suggestive, but the causes are not yet. Life is a complex STD, sudden traumatic death, insoluble. People should minimize their time in the lowest and highest Gs if they want to maximize their chance at newly normative extended lifetimes, which keep getting longer. No real sense of what might be possible if improvements continue. Could we live for thousands of. People compromise. They cut corners. They want to do things. They indulge their desires, their love of adventure. To have to return to Earth, so dirty and old, so oppressive, such a failure, so much the sad planet. They swore they would live by accident, but they were young at the time. Most older spacers go home to Earth as advised, 1 year every 7, because these are the ones living the longest, and the effect is self-reinforcing. The hunt continues for a fuller explanation. So, another technique in the book is not extracts, but simply lists. Lists of things. I've always liked lists. Whitman liked lists. It's an American tradition. So and the lists in this book, there's about 15 or 16 lists, and here's one of them. It's most of the lists you have to figure out what it's a list of, although I have to say it's exceedingly obvious, at least to me, most of the time you're done. And that'll be true here. Here's a list. Inadvertent fracking, failed seal, bad lock, bad luck, hyperbaric spark fire, carbon monoxide buildup, carbon dioxide buildup, design flaw, engine housing crack, sudden air loss, solar flare, fuel impurity, metal fatigue, mental fatigue, lightning strike, meteorite strike, accidental critical mass, brake failure, dropped tool, tripped and fell, coolant loss, manufacturing flaw, programming error, human error, containment failure, battery fire, distraction, AI malfeasance, sabotage, bad decision, crossed wires, recreational mental impairment, cosmic ray impact. So this is compiled from the Journal of Space Accidents, volume 297, year 2308. Another thing that Dos Passos did in USA that was quite beautiful were pocket biographies of famous Americans. Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Woodrow Wilson, John Reed. These are beautiful prose poems that give an angle on characters you thought you knew before, but you didn't really know as well as Dos Passos did, it seems. And I didn't think that would work in science fiction. Made-up characters, pocket biographies of made-up characters, it didn't seem right. And I thought to myself of Italo Calvino's beautiful book, Invisible Cities, and I thought, the solar system is filled with moons and planets that we don't know very well. So I'm going to read you one of the pocket biographies here. And this one is of Iapetus, which is one of the, well, you'll see. Iapetus looks like a walnut because it's squashed at the poles and has a prominent equatorial bulge, both quite visible from space. Why is it squashed at the poles? At one point, it was melted and became a big water drop rotated rapidly, its days only 17 hours long. Something passing by set it spinning like a top. It froze while still spinning. So why the prominent equatorial bulge? No one knows. Some aspect of the freezing of water drop to ice ball, most agree, some kind of surge or excess, but it's something that Saturnologists still argue about. Whatever caused it, the bulge immediately suggested itself as an obvious location for a city, as it could serve as something like a high street peninsula running all the way around the moon. The city was concentrated at first on the hemisphere facing Saturn, which looms overhead 4 times larger than Luna from Earth. This was felt worth having in one's sky, especially since Iapetus's orbit is at a 17-degree tilt from the plane of Saturn's rings, giving it a perpetually changing view of the gorgeous mobile. Almost all the other moons see the rings only edge on. From Iapetus bulge, one also has a view down to the rest of the moon's surface, 12 or 16 kilometers lower than the bulge, so there is always a broad ice gate below to balance the sublime ringed pearl above. What color the moon's surface is depends on where you're looking, because the leading atmosphere of Iapetus is quite black, while the trailing hemisphere is extremely white. This stark discrepancy, noted by Cassini in October of 1671 when he discovered Iapetus, is a result of the moon being tidally locked. The same hemisphere always leads the charge into the night, and black dust shed by the retrograde moon Phoebe therefore always falls on that side. In 4 billion years, the dust has accumulated to a depth of only a couple of centimeters. Meanwhile, the trailing hemisphere of the moon, gathering frost from the ice subliming off the dark side, is amongst the whitest ice in the whole solar system. The result is a two-toned moon, the only one in the solar system. When people came to occupy Iapetus, the top of the equatorial band was smooth and fitted with a rock and aluminum foundation. They then began to use seashell genes to shape the structures of the equatorial city. Some of the flat top of the bulge has been left open for spaceport runways and the like, but most of the bulge is now covered by a long, clear gallery tent, placed over buildings that line the great boulevard of High Street, alternating with farms, parks, gardens, and forests. As the air under the tent is always kept warm, the interior architecture can be very open, with Saturn often left visible, framed by gaps in ceilings and roofs. Seashell biomimicry allowed the builders to layer bioceramic structures one on the next, building structure on structure like corals until the area under the tent by now is almost full. Like most bioceramic structures, the beveled and layer shapes have been induced to produce scalloping, fanning, notching, and other conchological features so that the buildings look like great seashells stacked on the next. Sydney is often referenced because of its iconic opera house, but in fact the bulge now looks more like a Great Barrier Reef made of scallops, layered and everywhere holed as if by tube worms to let in the view of Saturn overhead. On the black hemisphere, Cassini Regio, the bulge bisects an area where people once upon a time went out in hoppers or rovers and blew the black dust away to make patterns out of exposed white ice. Anytime you can easily make such a contrast in the landscape, people have written out their thoughts for the universe to read. Before the Saturn League was formed, when the first arrivals from Mars had come for Titan's nitrogen and were exploring the other moons as well for whatever else might be plundered and taken back to the red planet, people had come here and etched white out of the black. An exhalation no stronger than a leaf blower's would do the job, and soon great fields of Cassini Regio were covered like newspaper rock with petroglyphs. There were white on black figures in abstract patterns, beasts, stick people, cocopellis, writing in many different alphabets, portraits, landscape features, trees and other plants, on it went. Later, some entire areas were cleared completely to white and then painted with collected black dust to a greater or lesser depth, achieving shadings that sometimes had a trompe-l'oeil depth of field proportioned for viewing such that they looked normal when viewed from the bulge, with others designed to be viewed from space. In other words, graffiti on Iapetus. Later, it was declared a mistake and a scandal, a moral stupidity, even a crime, in any case, disgusting, and there were calls for the entirety of Cassino Regio to be re-blacked. Someday it may happen, but don't hold your breath. For the truth is, we are here to inscribe ourselves on the universe, and it is not inappropriate to remind ourselves of this when blank slates are given us. All landscape art reminds us we live in a tabula rasa and must write on it. It is our world, and its beauty is entirely inside our heads. Even today, people will sometimes go out over the horizon and scuff their initials into the dust. What have I got here? Another list. It's too hard. There isn't time. Someone might laugh. To protect one's family, to protect one's honor, one's children, kin selection, bad seed, original sin, intrinsic evil, fortune, luck, destiny, fate, sloth, avarice, envy, malice, jealousy, anger, rage, revenge, for the hell of it. Because someone else might be taking advantage. Because no one knows for sure. Because it doesn't make any difference. Because it's written in the stars. Because no one told us not to. Because we can get away with it. Because there's no such thing as utopia, Stan. Because it probably wouldn't work anyway. Because it might make some money. Because there isn't enough for everyone. Because people don't appreciate what you do for them. Because they don't deserve it. Because they're lazy. Because they aren't like us. Because they do the same to you if they could. That's a nasty list. And you know, I was only going to do one extracts just to show you what they were like, but I like this bell so much that I've got another one a little bit shorter that also tells you a little bit about the world and the people of 2312. So, it is not a case of there is no gender, but rather a complex and ambiguous efflorescence, sometimes called a Froley Ursuline humanity, other times just a mess. Gatherings composed entirely of gender-indeterminate people are a new social space that some find intensely uncomfortable, eliciting comments such as, like a nakedness I hadn't thought could happen, or you're only yourself, it's terrifying, and so on. Clearly, a new kind of psychic distinctions can be pretty fine, with some claiming that gin-andromorphs do not look quite like androgens, nor like hermaphrodites, nor eunuchs, and certainly not like bisexuals, that androgens and women are quite different, and so on. Some people like to tell that part of their story, others never mention it at all. Some dress across gender and otherwise mix semiotic gender signals to express how they are feeling in that moment. Outrageous macho and femme behaviors, either matched with phenotype and semiotic indicators or not, create performance art ranging from the kitschy to the beautiful. As there are now people close to 3 meters tall and others less than a meter tall, Gender may no longer be the greatest divide in human. Even approaching the size of spider monkeys, a modification that was severely censured by larger people until longevity statistics kept reaffirming the association between smaller sizes and longer lifetimes, especially in light gravity. A saying amongst small people is, smaller is better. We all began female and always had both sexual hormones in us. We always had masculine and feminine behavioral traits, which we had to train into gender-appropriate behaviors, even though they were traits that everyone has. We selectively encouraged or repressed traits, so for most of our history we have reinforced gender. But in our deepest selves, we were always both. And now, in space, openly both. Very small or very tall, human at last. And now, one more short list, just because I don't want the lists to be, they both have been of a certain kind. And let's get a different list here. List number 15, the last one. Health, social life, job, house, partners, finances. Leisure, work, education, income, children, food, shelter, clothing, sex, healthcare, mobility, physical safety, social safety, job security, savings account, insurance, disability protection, family leave, vacation, place tenure, a commons, access to wilderness, mountains, ocean, peace, political stability, political input, political satisfaction, air, water, esteem, status, recognition, home, community, neighbors, civil society, sports, the arts, longevity treatments, gender choice, the opportunity to become more what you are. That's all you need. So, good. I think maybe it's beginning to look like a strange book, and I want to assure you that the bulk of it is just ordinary narrated scenes about characters, like any other novel. And the lists, the extracts, the planet biographies, and so on are little breaks to give you a rest between the intense action of the plot, which is a science fiction plot that concerns mysterious forces trying to disrupt the solar system, wreck cities, and there's also a romance, yes, the central romance. So I want to read parts of a scene between two of the characters, and really it's the protagonist, Swan. We'll follow her a little bit when she comes back to Earth the first time in the book, because this is part of that argument I was making to you, and I want you to bring that back into mind about the sublime and the technological sublime as I'll read. This scene will last a little bit longer, and then I want to do a couple of short scenes from the Paleolithic, from the next book I've done. And so, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, and I will be finished. So this chapter is called Swan and Zasha. In fact, and I don't even want to, let's just say swans arrived on Earth. Earth's 37 space elevators all had their cars full all the time, both up and down. There were still many spacecraft landings in a sense of course, and landings of gliders that then reascended on the elevators, but all in all, the elevators handled by far the bulk of the Earth space traffic. Going down in the cars were food, a crucial percentage of the total needed, metals, manufactured goods, gases, and people. Going up were people, manufactured goods, and the substances common on Earth but rare in space. These were many, including things animal, vegetable, and mineral, but chiefly by bulk, rare earths, wood, oil, and soil. The totals came to quite a flow of physical mass up and down, all powered by the counterbalanced forces of gravity and the rotation of the Earth, with a bit of solar power to make up the difference. In Quito, Swan took the train, because all of the space elevators have to be on the equator, or else they would be messed up, because they're swinging like bangles or like a hula hoop. In Quito, Swan took the train to the airport and got on an airplane flight to New York. The Caribbean's cobalt and turquoise and jade were brilliantly vivid. Even the brown underwater outline of drowned Florida had a jasper sheen, the stunning gloss of Earth itself. A much steelier ocean crashed whitely into Long Island as they descended over it, bumping and slipping in the air. Then they were landing on a runway somewhere on the mainland north of Manhattan, and at last she was out of the various travel containers, the rooms and vehicles and corridors and hallways, and under the open sky. Simply to be outdoors in the open air, under the sky, in the wind, this was what she loved most about Earth. Today, puffy clouds were massed overhead at about the 1,000-foot level, looked like a marine layer rolling in. She ran out into some kind of paved lot filled with trucks and buses and trolley cars and jumped around screaming at the sky, then kneeled and kissed the ground and made wolf howls, and after she had hyperventilated a bit, lay on her back on the pavement. No handstands. She had learned long before that handstands on Earth were really hard. Through gaps in the cloud layer, she could see the light but dark blue of the Terran sky, subtle and full. It looked like a blue dome flattened at its center, perhaps a few kilometers above the clouds. She reached up for it, although knowing too that it was just a kind of rainbow made it glorious. A rainbow that was blue everywhere and covered everything. The blue itself was complex, narrow in range, but infinite within that range. It was an intoxicating sight, and you could breathe it. One was always breathing it. You had to. The wind shoved it into you. Breathe and get drunk, oh my, to be free of all restraint, minimally clothed, lying on the bare surface of a planet, sucking in its atmosphere as if it were an aquavita, feeling in your chest how it kept you alive. No Terran she had ever met properly appreciated their air or saw their sky for what it was. In fact, they very seldom looked at it. She collected herself and walked over to the dock. A big, grumbling water ferry took her on and many others, and after negotiating a crowded canal, they were out in the Hudson River and going down to Manhattan. The ferry moved into a dock on Washington Heights, but Swan stayed on it as it plied its way down the Hudson side to Midtown. A few parts of Manhattan's grounds still stood above water, but most of it was drowned, the old streets now canals, the city an elongated Venice, a skyscraper Venice, a super Venice, which was a very beautiful thing to be. Indeed, it was an oft-expressed cliché that the city had been improved by the flood. The long stretch of skyscrapers looked like the spine of a dragon. The foreshortening effect as they got closer made the buildings look shorter than they really were, but their verticality was unmistakable and striking. Swan got off the ferry at the 30th Street Pier and walked on the broad catwalk between buildings to the High Line, where people filled the long plazas stretching north and south. Manhattan, on foot. Workers pushing narrow handcarts on crowded skyways, connecting island neighborhoods suspended between skyscrapers at differing heights. The rooftops were garnished with greenery, but the city was mostly a thing of steel and concrete and glass and water. Boats burbled about on the water below the catwalks in the streets that were now crowded canals. All the aerial plazas and catwalks jammed with people. As crowded as ever, people said. Swan dodged between the bodies of the crowd, working the border between the two directions of traffic, glorying in all the faces. They were just as heterogeneous as any spacer crowd, but the people were very much closer to average size, rather short at that, many fewer smalls and talls. Asian faces, African, European, everyone but Native Americans, as she always thought when she was in Manhattan. Talk about invasive biology. A building she passed had pumped out its old floor and now operated down there in a kind of big bathtub of air. She had heard that submarine and intertidal real estate was booming. Some spoke of pumping out the old subway system, which still worked wherever it ran above ground. Below her, the slop of water threw up a big ambient sound. Human voices and water splashing, and the cries of gulls back on the docks, and the rush of wind through the canyons of buildings, these were the sounds of the city. The water below was completely chopped up with intersecting wakes. Behind her, down the avenue to the west, mirror flakes of broken sunlight bounced on the big river. This was the thing she loved. She was outdoors, truly in the open, standing on the side of a planet in the greatest city of all. So now she's with a friend. Zasha's boat drifted in the ebb tide until it passed the battery, and the view to the Brooklyn shore opened up. The skyscrapers at the foot of Manhattan looked like a cluster of giant swimmers gathered knee-deep to charge into cold water. Between the buildings, the water sheeted like glass, and the canals were filled with little boats. The harbor bay, too, although not as densely. At any given moment, hundreds of watercraft were visible. They could see up both rivers, the Hudson and the East, and between those ran the smaller, straighter rivers of the streets, all under a cloudy sky. It was a Canaletto vision. Cloud reflections whitened the bay's watery sheen. It was so beautiful that Swan felt like she had been cast into a dream, and she reeled a little with the boats rocking. Feeling the G? Zasha asked. I am, kind of. Want to spend the night at my place? I'm getting kind of hungry. Sure, thanks. Zasha piloted the boat west across the river to a channel on the Jersey side that led west. It was hard to tell if it was a canal or a creek. Inland, the waterway opened up to the north, and Zasha turned up that way and docked at a wooden pier sticking into what looked like a shallow lake. Whole neighborhoods sloped right down into water. The east side of North America had always been a drowned coastline, now more than ever. A walk up a rise under a violent sunset sky, which was tastelessly mashing orange and pink together. At times like these, it was the eastern sky that really put on the show, but subtler, but more glorious. But no one looked that way. Zasha's place was a tiny squat next to a line of trees, as handmade and run down as any favela or shantytown that Swan had ever seen. What is this place? It's part of the Meadowlands. And you're free to make your own home here? As if. Actually, my rent is stupendous, but Mercury House gives me a little supplement to keep me out here away from them. Hard to believe. Anyway, it's fine. I like my commute. Swan sat gratefully in a beat-up armchair and watched her old partner putter about in the gloom. It had been a long time since they had banged around the solar system building terraria and raising Zephyr. It had even been a long time since Zephyr had died. And they had never gotten along very well, separating soon after Zephyr went off. Still, Swan recognized the way Zasha hovered over the stove, waiting for the teapot to boil, harboring a secret, knowing look she also recognized. What were you and Alex working on? Swan asked, and why didn't she tell me about it in the message she left? It's like I was just a courier for her and Pauline some kind of safe deposit box. Zasha didn't reply. Come on, tell me, Swan said. You can tell me. I can take it from you. I'm used to you telling me how bad I am. Zasha expelled a breath irritably, poured 2 cups of tea, steam in the gloom, catching light from somewhere. Z handed her one and sat down on a kitchen chair across from her. Swan warmed her hands on her cup. There's stuff I can't talk about. Oh, come on! And there's stuff I can. Alex got me involved in a group, hunting down some odd cubes. That's been interesting. But it was something she wanted kept confidential, along with some other things she had going, so maybe she thought you weren't very good at keeping things confidential. Well, why would she think that? But even Zasha knew of 3 or 4 examples of Swans being indiscreet, and Swan herself knew of several more. Those were accidents, Swan finally added, and not very big accidents either. Swan sipped the tea cautiously. Well, but maybe they seem to be becoming more frequent. You are not the same person you used to be. You have to admit. You've stuffed your brain with augmentations. I have not. Well, 4 or 5. I didn't like it right from the beginning. When you grow the religious part of the temporal lobe, you can turn into a very different person, not to mention risking epilepsy. And that was only the start. Now you've got that animal stuff in there, you've got Pauline in there, recording everything you see. It's not insignificant. It can do damage. You end up being some kind of post-human thing, or at least a different person. Oh, come on, Z. I'm the same as I always was, and everything you do can damage you. You can't let that stop you. Everything I've done to myself I consider part of being a human being. I mean, who wouldn't if they could? I would be ashamed not to. It isn't being post-human, it's being fully human. It would be stupid not to do the good things when you can. It would be anti-human. Besides, I haven't gone anywhere near as far as some people. I don't have a third eye. I don't break my ribs when I have an orgasm. I mean, just what? Well, I don't know. I try things that sound good. And have they all worked out for you? Swan sat there in the gloom somewhere in New Jersey. Outside was the open air of Earth. No. In fact, I've done worse things than what you know about, if you want to know the truth. Zasha stared at her. I'm not sure I do. I mean, something worse than animal brains in your head? Something worse than a cube in your skull? I mean, never mind. I don't want to know. But maybe Alex did, and maybe she had stuff that she didn't trust me with. Well, that she needed to keep to herself. And here you are, kind of a mess. I am not a mess. It seems like you're saying you are. You've had 5 or 6 or 7 brain tweaks over the years and a cube in your head. In fact, whatever was fashionable at the time. Yeah. Well, think about it. Swan put her teacup on the table. I think I'll go out for a walk. Well, good. Don't get lost. I'll cook up something while you're out. Say about 45 minutes. Don't forget to come back. Swan left the hut without speaking. Outside the door, she took her slippers off and stuffed them into her pocket, and dug her toes into the dirt and wriggled them around. Leaned over from the waist like a dancer and dug her fingers in, put hands to face and breathed. Dirt. Dirt, the ultimate ambrosia. Tasted like muddy mushrooms. It was after sunset, and there was an asphalt road running next to a marsh, green and yellow, the wind bouncing the reeds out there. She walked on the dirt by the side of the road and looked at the marsh and the sky. On the other side of the road, some old buildings were nestled under a stand of trees. Rows of old apartment blocks beyond. Croak, a frog. She sat on the edge of the marsh and saw the black dots, half in and out, half out of the water under her. A chorus of frogs, croaking. She listened for a while, watching the marsh and the wind, and heard suddenly that they were performing a call and response. If one frog said, "Ribbit," then all the others would repeat it for a while, up and down the road for as far as she could hear. Ribbit, 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 until in a momentary pause, one croaked, "Robot." And they would all repeat that for a while. Robot, robot, robot. And then it changed to limit, 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 and off the others went, as if speaking to her, like some Greek chorus transmogrified to frogs. So many limits, so many robots. The lump nearest her contributed only once in a while, puffing under his chin briefly and then croaking. Otherwise, it was perfectly still, except for a little shift of the eyeballs she could see in the dusk, a liquid blink, always alert as it looked at her. "Romper," it croaked in a pause, and Swan exclaimed, "Good for you," and said it with them for a while. Romper, romper. October on the northern hemisphere of Earth, so glossy and full. All her body-planet interfaces humming. Suddenly, life in space seemed a stark nightmare, an exile to the vacuum, everyone locked in sensory deprivation tanks, separate, virtual, augmented. Here, the real was real. Robber, 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 robber. The moment itself was robbed from them as it happened. Here she was, passing through a space, the flit of the now, dusk in a marsh in a transient universe, so strange, so mysterious. Why should anything be like this? The wind was cool, the clouds had a little twilight left in them, looked like rain. The leaves of the thorny vine on the ground were as red as maple leaves. The marsh was like a person out there breathing. Crows flew overhead, cawing, headed into the town and its heat islands. Swan knew a little of the crow language. They would say to each other, "Caw, caw, caw," as now, just chatting, and then one would shout a word out so clearly that it had become an English word, "Hawk!" and they would scatter. Of course, the word crow also came from their language. In Sanskrit, they had it as kaga. In Moroccan, Croatan, right? These are imported words from another language, a bird language. There were some people standing by the buildings next to the trees. They were small somehow, weighted down. Could this be so close to the great city? Was it indeed part of the city, part of what made it work? Not just the wetlands, but the legions of poor, marginal people living in the half-drowned ruins. The weight of the planet began to drag her down. Those people over there were like figures out of Bruegel, people from the 16th century, bowed down with time. Maybe these were the people living a real life, and what she did in space, nothing more than a dilettantism of a gaga aristoi. Maybe what she really needed to do was to live here and build things, maybe houses, little but functional, a different kind of Goldsworthy. Under the sky and the full light of the sun, the utter luxury of the real, the only real world, Earth, heaven and hell both, natural heaven, human hell. How could they have done such a thing? How could they have not tried harder? How could they have left? Space was a vacuum, a nothingness. They had inhabited it only by deploying little rooms, little bubbles. The city and the stars, sure, but it wasn't enough. there needed to be a world in between. This is what city people forgot. And indeed, off in space, they had better forget, or they would go mad. Here on Earth, one could remember, and yet not go mad. Not exactly. So, that's 2312. And I don't want to go on too long, so I'm going to skip the Burning Man festival of the year 30,000 BC, which probably I should read, but no. The novel that I finished and that will come out next is set in the Paleolithic, and it's about 30,000 years ago. The people who painted the Chauvet Cave was in the recent movie by Werner Herzog, The Cave of Forgotten Dreams. So that book, it looks like a strange shift, but I think now that I've sort of explained to you and read the argument of 2312, you can see that what makes sense next is to think about what was the original Sublime like. What were we like? We evolved on the savannah over a period of some hundreds of thousands of years, and we came to ourselves, to behaviorally modern humans, about 100,000 to 50,000 years ago, and we haven't changed at all genetically since then. So we're a new species, but on the other hand, in our terms, we're an old species, 100,000 years. And there's been no change in our DNA except for lactose tolerance, which appeared as a mutation in the people who were taking care of cows and sheep. Have found it a useful mutation because then they could drink their animals' milk. And so now some of us on Earth have lactose tolerance and others don't. That happened I forget how many years ago, but we know exactly when it came in now because we've gotten so good at investigating the past. So I feel like my Paleolithic novel is another kind of science fiction novel, because without science, we wouldn't know what was going on in prehistory because we didn't write it down. And writing was a huge technological change. It changed our brains. It was a changer of our consciousness, writing. And so I had to write a novel about people who didn't have writing. Peculiar, but my narrator told the story to me, and so it was all right. It's still an oral story. So I postulate, following the archaeologists, that we lived in small bands or packs of about 50 people. And obviously, because I wanted the Chauvet Cave, you know where they are. They're in the south of France, 30,000 years ago, a much, much colder place, the Ice Age going full on. And there was clearly trading going on, because we find seashells well inland. We find objects that move and pieces of minerals that have moved around a lot. So there were travelers. And one night by the fire, the traveler named Pippi Louette, which Pippi for short, drops in on our pack, the wolves, and around the fire he agrees to tell a story. So tonight he agreed to tell him a story, and they settled in around the fire happily. He stood by the fire and looked at him as he spoke. I am a traveler, as you know. I walk the surface of Mother Earth, and so do my fellow travelers, each of us on his own path. And some of us repeat our paths as long as we can find them, and nothing makes us take a different way. I am one of those myself, having a wife with my brother, and he goes out when I am at home, and he doesn't like it when I'm overly late, although both of us have been delayed once or twice through the years. What this means for me is I go out east to the gate between worlds and then turn north and walk for a fortnight right up to the edge of the great ice cap and come back just under that great white wall, or sometimes up on the ice itself if the summer melt has made the land next to the ice impassable. West I return, and south across the steppes to home, using paths of my own that no one knows, the best ways of all. That's the way it is for me, but in my travels I meet other men out walking the world, and some of them have neither circuit nor home, but wander always a new way. These men are curious people, odd in their ways and speech, but interesting for that, and we talk. Always when travelers get together over a fire, we talk. You can see that right now, I know. And travelers together talk about traveling. Where have you been? What have you seen? What are people like? What's out there in this world we live on? These are the questions we ask and the stories we tell, and some travelers travel to find the answers and tell new stories to those they meet. One such I met this summer at the farthest east of all the places I go. This man looked like the Northers, and I could barely understand him, but I could, and it got easier as we talked, because he had only one thing to talk about, which was this world we live on, its shape and size. All travelers agree, for we've seen it ourselves, there is ice to the north, wherever you go, and to the west is the great salt sea, and to the south, again the salt sea, although warmer and more calm, more in and out, and dotted with islands. We all agree on this, we travelers, as between us we have seen it all, and some travelers claim to have seen it all themselves alone. Good. Maybe they are even telling the truth. I can't say. But here's the thing. What about east? This northern man was like a lot of us. He had that question, and more than that, he wanted to know the answer. And no one had it. So he took off walking east, he said. He walked for days. He walked for months. He walked for years. He walked east from the time this question had come to him in his youth and kept on walking until he was a man in the middle of life. 17 years, he said, he walked east. I asked him what he had seen on this life walk. He told me of steppes that went on forever. There were mountains like those to the west of here, and some lakes bigger than any I've seen, little salt seas even. Their water was salt, he said, but mostly it was steppes. You know what that's like. The walking is good if it isn't too wet, and there are always animals to eat. So there really was no impediment to him. Yet there he sat, across a fire from me, as far to the east as I had ever been, but it was only the Gate of Worlds, a nice broad pass between low mountains to north and south. It had taken him 12 years to walk back to where we were. This he told me. Finally, I had to ask him, why did you come back? Having gone so far, why turn around? Why not keep going for the rest of your life? He stared into the fire for a long time before he met my eye and answered me. When I was as far east as I got, he said, I came to a hill and went up it to look. I was feeling poorly and my feet hurt, and no person I had met for several years spoke any word I understood. All my dealings were done by sign, and you can do that and still get by, but after a while you want a word with the people you see. I, Pippi, could only agree to that. And so, he said, he stood on that hill, and all to the east was just the same. There was no sign at all it would ever change. I realized, he said, that this world is just too big. You can't have it all, no matter how much you want it. It's bigger than any man can walk in one life. Possibly it just keeps going on forever. Possibly our Mother Earth is round, he said then, like a pregnant woman, or the moon. And if you walked long enough, you would come back to where you started, assuming the Great Salt Sea did not stop you. But really, there's no way to know for sure. And so I turned around, he said, because the world is too big, and most of all, I wanted to talk to somebody again before I died. Having said that, having told his tale, we stood and hugged, and he cried so hard I thought he would choke. I had to hold him up. Whether he had succeeded or failed, he did not know, and I didn't either. After that, he calmed down, and we looked at the fire until long in the night, telling other stories we knew. And before bed, I asked him, so what's for you now? What will you do now that you're back? Well, he said, to tell the truth, I'm thinking I may take off east again. That's my story for tonight's fire, Pippi said. I have chewed off a bit of this spring night for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. We have a few minutes for questions, and then we're going to have a reception outside. There's food and drink, and I also want to encourage you, if you didn't get these little tickets for sodas or wine, what have you, please see the people who have those. They will be out there around the fire ring, I guess. So we can take some questions for 10, 15 minutes or so. Any thoughts or questions, reactions? Anybody have homework for me?
I'll ask a question just because no one else is asking it.
Thank you for that. Yes, feel free to ask questions, folks.
Yes. In your new book, are you doing the sort of thing that you did in Antarctica and in Red Mars, Blue Mars, Green Mars, where there was a fight going on between those who want to keep things pristine, and those who wish to change things and modify things, to terraform things, to exploit the natural resources?
No, I'm not. Really, the Paleolithic, the hope, I think, in those people would be to change anything they possibly could to make life more comfortable and to stave off hunger. So hunger is a big deal. And every spring, it's not really winter so much as spring, when they run out of the stored food. Spring is the hungry time. So we were a technological species then, and I do describe, it is somewhat similar to Antarctica, Mars books, all my books, a high-tech species, but it's all made of wood and leather, and all that we see of their society, as intricate as it was, thousands of years long, stable, is the stone tips that they left behind. Stone, bone, tooth, but nothing of the things that they used, their furs. We see from their needles that they made clothes, and then at the same time the needles appear, they suddenly are hundreds of miles further north than they were before. So we see that the high-tech, the technological innovations that they made, mainly the women around the fire, made differences in how comfortable and how much we could control the Earth. So it's not so much terraforming as it is adapting to the landscape that they had, because they had so little power to change the landscape. They had fire, and they burned the landscape from about 50,000 years ago. We see that humans used fire to burn the landscape and make open land to hunt in. And it was, we've changed this Earth from about 50,000 years on. But in my book, one small group over a small period of time, I wanted to get down to the scale of what it would feel like to live there. This is really, the passage I read is the most global perspective in the entire book. A traveler comes by that knows more than the locals do. So in a way it's similar to my previous work, in a way different, because we weren't the same. It's a funny argument I'm making. We were exactly the same, we were very different because we had that different technology.
Other questions? Yes, there you go.
First of all, I wanted to say that the part of 2312 that moved me the most was the rewilding of the Earth. That is just such a beautiful image. It's really stayed with me. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you have to read the book. It's very moving. But as you, in the book, there are times when you're sort of reconstructing how we got to 2312. And you've got this era, is it the dithering?
The dithering.
The dithering.
Yes. Now.
And I wondered, I was depressed at how long you let the dithering last before anything happened. And I'm wondering upon what you based your estimate of how long we were going to like screw around before something changed, because I was hoping we might change while I'm still alive, unless I can get some synthetic biology to help me.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I broke the history of the next 300 years down into periods, periodization. And, you know, having gone from the medieval period to the modern period to the postmodern period, you run out of names, you need new names. You can't just have postmodern, post. So yes, I called our age the dithering. And when I look at the political gridlock in this country, and when I look at the ability to deny the realities of climate change, to deny what science is telling us about what's happening, on the one hand, I think it might take a long time. On the other hand, I hope that it won't, and I thought that the book might be a shock. You think, oh my God, I don't want my era called the dithering. And the next era afterwards is called the turnaround. So let's push the date of the turnaround back a little bit. And so that's really the point of that exercise. Yes, there's...
Comment first was just how moved I was when I looked at us as a sad planet. That was hard and eye-opening, and it did stimulate something in me, so thank you for that. And I was just wondering, are you optimistic? With all the technology and all the things we see changing, there's so much that is hard to digest. And so I'm just wondering, are you hopeful
I am hopeful, I am optimistic. I am optimistic biochemically, as my mom can testify, but I am also optimistic politically as an act of will, even though I am quite angry and pessimistic and sometimes in the intellect. But the reasons for optimism are these. We have the physical capacity to feed everybody on the planet. We have the ability to cap our population surge, and we know the technology for that, which is simply social justice and women's rights, at which point immediately population growth ceases and we get stabilization or even a little shrinkage, which might not be bad. So the methodologies are there, and we don't have to invent any science-fictional sciences to get out of the climate change problem. We merely need to make a rapid shift to clean energy sources, decarbonize, in other words, and no new inventions are necessary. We can make the inventions better, but we don't need something radical or new. So then you think, when I say, well, it's only therefore a political problem. So that's kind of depressing, because our politics is gridlocked and difficult. But on the other hand, we believe in democracy and we believe in science. And I say everybody believes in science because when you're sick, you go to the doctor, and your doctor is a scientist. So when your life is on the line, you say, well, I hope science can help me, and you give it a try. So no matter what people say about science, when push comes to shove, they believe in it, and their life is on the line. So believing in democracy, believing in science, we merely have to defeat the forces that think that we don't have a problem. And so I'm very optimistic because it's going to become clearer and clearer as sea level rises, as temperature rises, as Tucson cooks like a bug on a plate. People are going to become more convinced and things are going to happen. So I think there's reason to be optimistic, and not only that, an obligation to be optimistic, because we are the prosperous West. If impoverished, immiserated people in the poorest parts of the world are optimistic, how can we be pessimistic? That would be improper. So I am an optimist very stubbornly and angrily.
Great. I'm going to take one more question in the back, and then we'll break. And I also, before I forget, Stan will be signing books up front, and I want to thank the bookstore for having books to sell here. So we'll take one more question, and then have book signing and a reception.
I love the what if in science fiction, but I've always been struck about the idea that while the locations and the technology changes, the culture always seems just as petty and selfish as ours today. Why is it that science fiction has such trouble imagining a truly alien culture? I mean, we have cultures on the Earth today that I would have trouble understanding how they think. But why is it that science fiction, I mean, is that just an intractable writing problem? Why are there not truly alien cultures that are hard for us to understand in a science fiction?
Well, we're not good at imagining things that we have never seen. So I've never written an alien novel, you might notice, because the alien is going to be truly alien, and therefore we're not going to be able to communicate with it. It's not going to start speaking English on page 2. And so Stanislaw Lem wrote the only alien novel possible, which is called Solaris, in which we find an alien consciousness, we can't communicate with it, story over. So in a sense, science fiction has been very good at imagining, in the way anthropologists would, cultures that are same but different, different but same. Same genetics, same biology, but cultural differences. And I think science fiction's done a much better job than the rest of literature at portraying that kind of cultural difference. I really do. And you know, I refer you to the great mama of our field, Ursula Le Guin, The Left Hand of Darkness. Ponder that one for a while, and even though it's not a radical difference, it's not an alien, it's enough to throw you for a loop and make you think again. And that's just one most obvious example, because classes here are reading it right now, and many people know The Left Hand of Darkness, especially many people who come to see me, which is kind of great. In other words, there's a tradition in science fiction, a very strong tradition of attempting to represent difference, but they hit that limitation, which is just is a basic human problem in recognizing what's truly alien. I mean, imagine a new color. Okay, well, I can't. And you can read A Voyage to Arcturus, where the character goes to another planet and he keeps talking about the color Jale, J-A-L-E. And there's another color in Voyage to Arcturus, and they're not the same as our colors. There's a lot of words given to it, but you still don't see that color. So there are intrinsic limits on how well we can do that thing. So I am going to be up here, and I know that I didn't leave enough time for questions or conversation, but I'm going to stick around until if everybody who would like to check in, say hi, talk, I'll be here. I'd like to talk with you. And once again, thank you for coming. Been lovely. I hope to come back.